So today is Earth Day, and as Glenn said, she's pretty pissed. Earth Day is a special day celebrated all over the world on April 22nd since 1970. The most famous image of the Earth in space was taken in December of 1972 by the Apollo 17 astronauts on their way to the moon. It was taken from a distance of 18,000 miles away, thus the name it was given, the blue marble, depicting the Earth looking like a small, frail, vulnerable, and isolated little blue marble in the vast expanse of space. In the almost 50 years since our modern environmental awakening, we have learned so much about how the Earth's ecosystems have become dangerously compromised and about the role that human activity has played. We know the causes of climate change, the use of fossil fuels for energy, transportation, and manufacturing, the destruction of rainforests and farmland for the raising of animals for human consumption, and an economic system that values profits over people and clean air and water. We know the consequences of a mere 1 degree increase in the global temperature, more frequent and severe storms, droughts, and floods, ocean acidification, food and water shortages, human migrations and climate refugees, the spreading of tropical diseases, and mass extinctions of plants and animal species. But what we are now focused on, with an urgency unlike any other we've experienced in human history, are the solutions, and they abound. The advances in technology that have allowed us to develop solar and wind energy, machines that clean plastic from the oceans, disposable containers made from edible plants and compostable organic material, light bulbs that last for 18 years are all part of the momentum that cannot be stopped. And a big part of the solution lies with us. The choices we make about how we want to live and what kind of world we want to leave our children and their children. And that is the ethical conversation we need to keep having. So today I'd like to welcome our speaker, Adrian Hyde, who's going to talk about regenerative agriculture at the Nexus. And I just want to point out that the fake news has a lead article on this. Fake news. It's called Can Dirt Save the Earth? So we're very cutting edge, we're very current today. They didn't know we were having this program. Adrian Hyde owns and manages Dunwald Farm, a certified organic vegetable farm in Hopewell, New Jersey. Supporting his farming activities, Adrian is also an ACE certified master mechanic and Rutgers Master Gardener of Mercer County. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia and his graduate degree from Harvard University. Adrian's passion for organic agriculture stems from the fact that it lies at the intersection of multiple areas of great importance: ecological stewardship, health, animal welfare, and community. Please help me welcome Adrian Hyde.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you. It's funny, when I came here, it's sort of nostalgic in a way. I used to live a few blocks from here for a long, long time, so I must have walked by here a few hundred times over the years. And it's also funny because where I moved to, my farm is in Hopewell, New Jersey, but I live in Princeton, New Jersey. And that's where Einstein spent most of his, a good chunk of his life there. And as you may know, he was a big proponent of ethical culture and actually spoke to its importance as being above all else. And so I wanted to share with you before I start talking about what regenerative agriculture is, I kind of wanted to share with you a little bit about my personal journey on how I got to where I am. My entire life I've been, like yourselves I imagine, somebody who really loves nature, loves plants, animals, rivers. I spent a lot of time outdoors. And these are things that are just so fundamental to me and so fundamental to our lives. And so I became at an early age an environmental activist, a very active one. And I was always amazed at just how many different problems they were, so I kept wanting to go one level up, okay? So if you're worried about ocean plastics, you can go and try to clean it up, which is very hard to do. I'll talk more about that later on, perhaps. So it'd be better just to keep it from getting there in the first place. Okay, but then how do you do that? What's causing it? And you just keep going up one level, and you start finding commonalities at the higher, further up the tree of causality. And we just finished up last week in Princeton. We had our own environmental film festival, which was terrific. A lot of the movies I think you show here, we showed. One of them dealt with ocean plastics, and it was called Albatross, and I brought a copy of it for you all if you choose to see it at some point. But what it did for me is it's a movie made by a very accomplished artist. And he took it in ultra high resolution. And it was basically showing what was happening far away on Midway Island to the albatrosses as a result of ocean plastics. And you could take the word albatross out and put dolphin in, or put whale in, or put plankton in, or anything. But the point of it was to connect people emotionally with things far away that come from us. So it's like everything returning home to where it came from. And I really feel that the emotional connection, the personal connection, is really what makes all of the sort of environmentalism, all the things that we're trying to do, it's what makes it work. So in a way, if you keep pulling on the thread and you keep going higher and higher, it all comes back to here. No matter what it is that whatever problem it is we're trying to solve, it comes from a place here, and it comes from community, it comes from sharing things with one another. I'm a farmer, and I will tell you that farming is the learning curve for farming is more than a lifetime learning curve. It's several lifetimes of learning curves. You never run out of things to learn, right? So you're not going to learn everything you need from books or from other videos or YouTube or whatever people are using. You learn a lot from your friends, right? And there's kind of a shortage of people out there who have really good hands-on knowledge on ecological stewardship. And so it's important that when people hear things about ecological stewardship, that they share it with their friends, while they're having lunch or having coffee or walking in Central Park on a day like today or whatever. The point is that my journey basically leads to here, because I think the fact that you all are already here is the most important thing. Even if you didn't do anything tomorrow to make the world a better place from an environmental standpoint, just showing up, I think, is the most important thing. Showing up for each other, speaking with each other, that's how the dialogue is going to get out there. I was working on a number of things. I worked very hard on banning fracking in New York State. That was one of the things that I worked on for many years. And there again, I learned an important lesson. We were doing a lot of the traditional sorts of things, picketing, writing to Congress people, giving talks, all sorts of advocacy work. And then a filmmaker named Josh Fox comes by, and he makes a movie called Gasland. And in the movie Gasland, he showed somebody lighting their faucet on fire, when they turned it on. And, he made that with a cheap camera and an assistant and a producer. And the three of them basically outdid everything that the rest of us had done in the 5 years before that, almost single-handedly. And what that showed me is it showed me the power of art, the power of visual media, the power of sharing a story, of seeing. So it's funny, everybody has something to bring to these problems, whether you're a marketing person or an art person or a scientist or just somebody who cares. We all have a role to play, but after the fracking thing, we did a lot of work on waste reduction, and the movie that is playing later on it's a good one. It's a fun movie about food waste, and started a recycling, a nonprofit recycling entity that kept a lot of stuff out of landfills. But again, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do the thing where I felt I had the most bang for the buck. Like, where could I put finite time, money, and energy where it would do the greatest good? And I really studied that hard. And it just kept coming back to agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. And if you start thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like I was looking at the materials that you have over on the table over there, and there's, first of all, it's excellent material, all of it. And, but there's a thing on the cover story of one of the pamphlets about Paul Hawken and his book Drawdown. And there's a little pie chart in there that shows all the different things that we can be doing to move the ball forward in terms of ecological stewardship and taking care of Mother Earth. And, you know, several of the slices on that pie relate to our food system, right? Or they relate to agriculture. And if they don't relate to it directly, they certainly relate to it indirectly. What we grow, you know, and how we grow it is actually fundamental and central to so much of environmental stewardship today. So I started farming, and I wanted to do it in a way that I could teach to other people, where I knew that we were getting the pesticides out of our, you know, getting environmental toxins out, taking care of the land. And, you know, fast forward a few years later on, I became I'm currently executive director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association in New Jersey. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to approach this issue from both sides. On the one side, on the supply side, we're trying to educate farmers on the tools available to them to grow in a sustainable manner. And I'll talk more about that. On the demand side, though, it's equally important. The farmers are going to grow what you want. And so, you know, we all need to be telling the farmers what it is we want. Do we want conventional things that might have pesticide residues and that are grown in a way that actually degrades our soils and you know, harms pollinators and our ecosystems, or do we want something that is more healthful for the long term? The farmers are waiting to hear from all of us about what it is that we want. So what I like to do is talk a little bit about what regenerative agriculture is. I can't even believe what a coincidence this is. So, you know, so if you haven't seen it, you know, this cover story of the New York Times thing is about exactly what I'm talking about today. I'm just curious how many of you have ever even heard of what regenerative agriculture is. Has anyone heard of it? Okay, so a few hands here. So farming or agriculture, there's a range of practices out there. And, you know, people want to attach labels to things, but really it's kind of a spectrum. So conventional agriculture is what most of us think about agriculture today, where it's very mechanized. It treats the soil more or less as a planting medium, and the nutrients and so forth that feed the plants are typically in the form of fossil fuel-based fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, and so forth. And generally the crops that lend themselves very well to that sort of a system are things like wheat and soy and corn and things that can be turned into other foods that have long shelf life and fit into our market-based economy very, very easily. Organic, everyone's heard of organic. It's one of the few agricultural systems that actually has law behind it. You can't use the USDA organic seal unless you comply with the regulations that are required if you're going to use that. But even there, it's a lot of people who consider themselves organic farmers would look at some of the practices that are actually allowed in the regulations and say, you know, I don't want that, right? I want to do better than that. And so there are, you know, some pretty powerful commercial interests in agriculture, and some of them are always looking for a way to kind of improve their businesses' profitability and so forth. And so they put a lot of pressure on the organic standards, and you know, the people who have more of an ecological standpoint are always trying to fight that back. And so there's this tension in the organic community right now about what it means to be organic. But whatever those debates may be, it does mean certain things that are very, very important, like most people don't realize that certified organic by definition means non-GMO. So you don't have to go and look for something with the non-GMO label if it already has the organic label, because the organic label means it's not GMO, plus other things. There are other things that are allowed in the regulations for organic, that you're allowed to use certain biological-based pesticides, and that is better than using a chemical pesticide in many cases, not always, but there's collateral damage with that. You're fighting nature, you're killing things, and like if you have cabbage leaper and you put a bunch of BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, it's a bacteria, you put that on your crop, you're going to kill other things too. Right? And that's not working with nature. What regenerative agriculture is it's working with nature, working with the power of nature to maximize the benefit of photosynthesis, the energy that's coming and hitting the Earth's surface that's available for us to capture and harness and use, as well as working with the soil microbiology to enhance and support the plant's health. Interesting thing is that a lot of the pesticides and so forth that are used in conventional agriculture often are necessary because the plants aren't healthy, and the plants aren't healthy because the soil's not healthy. What you'll find is if you have really healthy soil, which is what we want for our broader ecology, the plants will fend for themselves, making it so that you don't really need those other things. And people say, I don't know if I believe that or not. I'll tell you, in my own experience, it's absolutely true. When I started off, the first years I was farming the land that we're farming right now, I had a lot of pest pressure. And we just kept working on the soil, working on the soil, working on the soil. We don't allow any chemicals on our farm at all. And today, I don't have any pest pressures. We use a lot of natural methods of creating an ecosystem that's in balance. One of the wonderful things is you can actually see it. You can dig up, take a shovel, put it in the ground, dig it up, and look down there, and you'll see certain things that tell you that you're doing it right. And so I want to talk, I did prepare a few slides, but I don't like speaking from slides, but I'm just going to show you one picture, only one picture, okay? And you may not be able to see it. I don't know if anyone can see this, but I'll describe it if you can't see it. Looks kind of like a funny thing here. What I just showed you a picture of, and you probably couldn't see, was carbon, liquid carbon, leaving the root of a plant and going into a mycorrhizal hyphal network. Okay, so plants, when they photosynthesize, they create carbohydrates, they create effectively a liquid carbon, and some of that is used to make more plant, and some of it is used the plant will put it into the soil. It's an exudate through the root system of the plant, so it's a root exudate. And so it puts these sugars into the soil, and it attracts the soil microorganisms, all different, millions and millions of different kinds of soil microorganisms, and they form a symbiotic relationship. So what ends up happening is that all these soil microorganisms start doing work for the plant, and the plant is basically paying them off, saying, here you go, here's what you want, give me what I want. And so the soil microbiology is what is out there in the soil, mining the nutrients, mining the minerals and the trace minerals, bringing them to the plant, and then as the plant grows, it puts more and more exudates into the soil. And it's a very real thing. You can actually see it. This is with an electron microscope. And so that carbon that is going into the ground ends up in the bodies of all of these microorganisms, and eventually they die. But now that carbon, in the soil is tied up. And it gets tied up for a very, very long time. There are different forms of carbon in the soil. You'll hear, like in the New York Times article, they go into that a little bit. But once it's down there, it stays there unless you do something to bring it up. So regenerative agriculture is basically harnessing the power of nature to, and one of the happy byproducts of it is it puts a tremendous amount of carbon back in the soil. How do you keep the carbon from coming back out of the soil? Okay, well, the way you do that is through regenerative agriculture, and there's some basic techniques. I'll talk a little bit about them, but I don't want to I'm keeping an eye on the time. One is called cover cropping. I don't know if people know what cover crops are, but cover crops are crops that you grow without the intention of harvesting them for our consumption. They're there to do something else. They're there to feed the soil. They're there to do something for the soil. And the interesting thing is a regenerative organic farmer would look at cover crops like tools in their toolbox. Different cover crops do different things. Legumes will fix nitrogen. Radish and other taprooting type things will, aerate the soil and bring up mineral and micronutrients from the subsoil. Buckwheat establishes itself very, very quickly. You always want to keep your soil covered, right? So cover cropping is a strategy. Reduced tillage is a strategy. When you till, meaning you kind of chopping up the soil, you're chopping up all those hyphal networks and destroying a lot of that soil microbiology. You're kind of hitting a big reset button instead of just letting it live, right? You want to let your soil do its thing. And so reduced tillage is another thing. Rotations are another thing. You grow different things at different times. The reason for that is that plants need a lot of different things. They don't need one thing. Like conventional agriculture is a lot about NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and finding chemical ways of getting that into the plants. But there's a lot more that plants need than that, and it needs to be in the right balance. And so rotating your crops and making sure that you're putting different things in there. If you have some pathogens in there, you might want to cover crop with a mustard or something to kind of as a natural fumigant. Those, and then compost is the thing they spoke about most in the New York Times article. As a mechanic, when you're diagnosing a problem, it's you have fuel, spark, and compression. It's like, what are the things that we need to make this car go? And then you start tracing back to figure out what the problem is. Well, all that soil microbiology needs food, and compost is that food. Organic matter is that food that kind of kickstarts that whole thing, right? And compost is another one of the techniques of regenerative agriculture. So why does regenerative agriculture matter? Well, you probably know that a third of the Earth's surface that isn't under ice is used for agriculture right now. And when you are farming this way, you can sock away a tremendous amount of carbon, which is important in terms of what we face with climate change, but it's important for many other reasons. And this comes back to my first comment that there are so many individual things that we need to do out there to make things right. That you kind of have to understand that we need to take a systems approach. There's not like a pill that we can take to make our problems go away. We need a lot of things working together at the same time. And when you look at our agricultural system, you find that, okay, so if you care about climate change, everybody knows how important the rainforests are. Well, why are the rainforests being cut down right now? Well, it's to make more agricultural land. Why are we making more agricultural land? Well, it's because of the farming system that we have. So if we are going to heal ourselves and we're going to heal our Mother Nature, I want you to think about, imagine a Venn diagram with 4 circles on it, H-E-A-L. The H is human health. Okay, I'm going to come back to each one of these things. The E is the environment, ecology. The A is animal welfare, and the L is local economies. All of these things intersect in terms of what we grow and how we grow it. On the human health side of things, we're not going to be much use to anybody if we're not healthy ourselves. And right now we're not healthy. If you look at the health statistics in the United States, it's pretty poor, actually. And if you look at the percentage of our incomes that we spend on health care, that's also very, very high. If we spent more money on food, we'd save a multiple of that on our healthcare expenses and get things moving in the right direction. Some of the things that are worth exploring are, if you look at changes in our healthcare statistics over the last few decades, really since the World War II, since the industrialization of agriculture, you'll see certain autoimmune things flying off the chart. So, David Perlmutter, he's a medical doctor that talks a lot about this. He says essentially what we've done in our culture right now is we've traded infectious disease for chronic disease. And that's actually true. And so why is that happening? Well, part of it's pesticide residues. Part of it is that we're eating too many of the wrong things and not enough of the right things. There are a lot of explanations for it, but the correlations are very, very, very strong. And, no doubt you already are very aware of that. But there are some things that are coming out that are more recent that you may not be aware of. And there's a lot of attention on the pesticides that are being used in our food supply. 30 years ago, you didn't hear about people didn't talk about gluten. I mean, how many conversations did you hear about gluten 20, 30 years ago? You didn't. Now everybody is now gluten intolerant. Well, why is that? Why is this change happening all of a sudden? Well, there are reasons for it, and one of the reasons is that in our digestive tracts, we have things that are not us. Like most of the cells in the human body are actually not human cells. There are gut microbiota. And our gut microbiota are different than we are, and we need them. We have a symbiotic relationship with them the same way that plants have a symbiotic relationship with soil. And what has been shown is even the pesticides and pesticide residues that are in conventional agriculture, even if they don't affect us directly, they are affecting us indirectly by compromising the health of our gut microbiota. And there's a lot more research being done on that right now, and it's conclusive. So it really is important for our health to start embracing regenerative organic agriculture. The ecology side of things, that's easier to see, actually. People have heard about the bee die-offs, which, you know, there are a lot of explanations for it, but just think of your own tolerance for different. If there's a resilient species, maybe they can handle one thing or two things or three things that are kind of putting pressure on them. But after you layer on the fourth and the fifth and the sixth thing, it collapses, right? So a lot of people talk about the bees as being perhaps the varroa mite, but they didn't have a problem with the varroa mite before. What is it that's reducing their ability to fend for themselves? And people talk about the neonicotinoid pesticides, but whatever the cause is it ties back to our agricultural system. It ties back to pesticides. It ties back to the lack of agrobiodiversity. Monarch butterflies, another thing that everybody cares about, everybody loves. Their habitat is going away because we have these vast monocultures instead of having more diverse systems, diverse plants in our system. You know, animal welfare, I'm not going to talk about that a lot, but, you know, suffice it to say that having an animal in a concentrated animal feeding operation creates numerous problems. Like, they're just managing their waste is an environmental biohazard unto itself, instead of being an asset, which it is if they're out on the range being pastured in a very sensible and sustainable way. And then, you know, finally, local economies. Wendell Berry is one of my favorite authors, and, you know, he writes, he's a very artistic person and a very smart person. And, you know, one of the things he writes about is how vast communities throughout the Midwest have just disappeared. Farming communities, even here in New York and New Jersey, they're disappearing very, very quickly, and ways of life that were really quite wonderful are vanishing, and what is replacing them is the machine, basically. And that actually, so people making very short-term decisions about what they want and convenience and price and things like that, they're sacrificing longer-term things. So local economies are helped when you have more local business. And when you have local farming businesses, they're proven to have a very strong multiplier effect in the local communities. They support the communities that they're in. So it's definitely something that we want to advocate for. We want to be supporting small local farms doing things in a sustainable manner. So if we look at health, we look at the environment, animal welfare, local economies, they all tie back to a system of agriculture. They all tie back to what we grow and how we grow it. I just want to, you know, leave a few things out there and then maybe do some Q&A if we have time. And everyone, you know, we have a natural tendency to want to understand why are things the way that they are. And people far smarter than I am have spent a lot of time on this. And there are no single answers, but there are a few things that you can point to. One is that there's an economic concept called an externality. I don't know how many people have heard of negative externalities, but I want you to just say that word, negative externality. Our economic system is not working for us right now. It is not taking us where we want to be. So that's why we have to take ourselves where we want to be. A negative externality is an example of a cost of production that is not borne by the producer. It's borne by you, right? So if you think about a farmer in Iowa, you know, spreading nitrogen fertilizer all over their fields, and then that nitrogen fertilizer runs off into the streams and then ends up in the Gulf of Mexico and creates a dead zone the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. That is a socialized cost of incalculable amounts, right? And you know, pollinator die-offs. We need pollinators, by the way. If we don't have pollinators, we're in trouble, right? And so if somebody's out there spraying their field with these awful pesticides and killing all the insects, that is going to come back and get all of us, not the farmer who sprayed it, right? So these are examples of costs that we're incurring right now, but there's no incentive for the farmer to do it right. They're not having to pay those costs, you are, right? Similarly, there is such thing as positive externalities. So if a carbon farmer, a regenerative organic farmer, is socking away tons of carbon in the soil, they're not getting paid for that right now. So the incentive for them to continue with that is reduced somewhat. So, you know, naturally we need to look at the shortcomings. I'm not big on absolute anything, right? So every system has its pros and its cons, but we need to be more aware of the shortcomings of the way our economy is structured right now, and be more thoughtful and more vocal in terms of how we address those shortcomings. With that, I'd like to answer any questions that you might have about regenerative organic agriculture.
Eggs and free range. I see a lot of conflicting things and I get confused when I go to buy. What is going on? You know, the prices goes all over.
Yeah, what's going on is there's pasture, cage-free, you know, organic. There are a lot of different labels flying around out there, and it's really confusing, actually. And this is an example of where there's that tension between the commercial interests and the people who are trying to do things in a more honest and sustainable way. The best way to know that you're buying a quality product where the animal has been treated right is if you know your farmer. You actually, you know, there are tons of farmers markets around here. You want to get to know your farmer because you can actually produce organic eggs in a way that isn't good for the animals, right? Like they say, oh, the animals need to have access to the outdoors, so there may be like a little door in this huge, giant, you know, gymnasium type thing with a little patch of grass outside it. And even if the birds don't even know the door is there, right? And they can call it that. And so a lot of the stuff that you see in the supermarket, you got to pull on the thread. You have to do some homework on it and try to find a supplier that you trust who is doing things the right way. And in the case of the egg industry, there aren't a lot of them.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I have a question concerning the state of lawmakers and the political class making decisions regarding agriculture today. What steps do you think can be taken to accelerate the education and movement towards responsible long-term decision-making regarding agriculture? And it sounds to me like your regenerative agriculture strategy is possibly the most enlightened, even more than organic. So we need to make steps in those directions. How can we accelerate that education and shift in policy with our lawmakers?
So this is a Farm Bill year, so we're very heavily involved in the Farm Bill. My organization, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, has been advocating for many things. We had this big battle last year called Keep the Soil in Organic to make sure that hydroponics couldn't be labeled as organic. I think hydroponics are great. That's my training is in hydroponics, but it's not organic. It's certainly not regenerative organic. And the thing is once commercial interests get involved in anything, right, whether it's politics itself or anything, agriculture, once the commercial interests are in there, you really have to be informed, right? And it's really hard to fight that. And in a way, we have to do it. We can't count on our politicians to solve our problems for us because they're not going to. It's broken. And so the way around that is community action and relocalizing. So that's another word I hope everyone remembers is relocalizing. when you bring things back into your communities, like my farm is a really quick drive from here. You all could come out and visit, right? And a lot of farms are very close to here. Bring your business back home. Bring it back home and give it to the people that you know are doing things the right way. Don't send it to some faraway place. Another thing I want people to remember is race to the bottom, okay? If nobody is actually researching how things are done, and they only focus on price, the person who's going to have the lowest price is the person who can exploit the most things typically, whether it be people or the soil or the animals or society, whatever. And so it's really one of those things where community is where it all comes back to, and that's why I love speaking here, because this is about community. This is about people looking beyond the price tag and asking the hard questions about what it means to buy this product or that product. So unfortunately, I don't have high hopes for the Farm Bill this year. We're putting a lot of work into it, but I know from direct experience that when you go to the farmer's market, when you know your farmer, when you take your kids to the farm, and when you join a CSA, when you do all those things, that's much, much more powerful and much more controllable.
We've been concerned about the increasing numbers of antibiotic-resistant organisms.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about the effect of this in agriculture?
Well, factory farming, the animals are not in their natural habitat. They're not eating what they're supposed to be eating. Cows aren't supposed to eat grain. They're ruminants. They're supposed to eat grass. But what they're fed in the feedlots is grain. And that makes them sick. And to keep them from becoming very, very sick, they get pumped full of antibiotics to keep them alive and to have them gaining weight. And that's true kind of all factory farming operations. It's cruel, it's inhumane, and it basically, those antibiotics get passed through into the manure, they get passed through into the meat that we eat and things like that. So essentially, we're setting ourselves up for a big fall when it comes to superbugs. The funny thing is in a 20-minute talk, you can't go through all the different things that come from our food system, but this risk of superbugs is huge. It's huge. And it's directly a factor of the way that we're raising our food right now. And so one of the ways of making sure that you're not eating antibiotic-tainted meat and getting that stuff out of our system is stop buying the other thing, right? Make sure that you buy the antibiotic-free, and ideally, if it's organic, it's going to be antibiotic-free. Go that way. But it's an enormous risk. Very good question.
Thanks. Yeah. A couple of quick things. By organic, it's USDA certified organic. Do you think that's worth that can be trusted? And Wendell Berry, one of my favorite authors as well. I was wondering if you have read It All Turns on Affection. This is kind of a book-long essay, which I love. He's really, I think, proposing an attitude of affection toward the land rather than ownership and exploitation of resources and so forth, but really a genuine affection for nature and the land.
So Wendell Berry, he's talented on so many different levels, and I work with kids a lot out at the farm, and we live in this virtual world, right? Our relationships with each other and our relationships with nature are compromised by this thing, this phone thing, and the kids are absolutely just, they can't put them down. And but when you get out there in nature and you dig a hole in the ground and you see all the worms there and you plant something and you see it grow, it changes people. It will change you. Being in nature changes you. So here, most of you live in Manhattan. I used to live in Manhattan. Get out of here every now and then. Go visit a farm, just for a day. There are plenty of wonderful places to visit. If you've never been to Princeton, New Jersey, or Lambertville, or New Hope, it's a great day trip. Get out there, go see it, go to a farm or something. But I agree complete with what you're saying, and that's another reason why I'm so pleased to be here speaking with you today, is you're about community, you're about respect, about compassion and empathy. Those are the things that are really going to solve the problems.
Maybe one more. Anybody on this side?
I was just curious about what crops you grow and how often you turn them over season by season,
I'm going towards a completely no-till system in permanent raised beds. And one of the things I didn't mention, so if you think about the spectrum of farming practices, it's an oversimplification, but you could have conventional, then something called IPM, which stands for Integrated Pest Management, then organic, like USDA organic, then you might talk about regenerative agriculture over here, and then some people talk about restoration agriculture. There's an author named Mark Shepard who wrote a book called Restoration Agriculture, and then there's a thing called permaculture. I'm more on the side of, I do grow vegetables and berries in raised beds, but I'm also have some permaculture aspects. Permaculture is a made-up word that stands for permanent agriculture. And it's based on perennial crops, like nuts, berries, and things that you don't replant every year, because when you replant every year, you need to prepare a seed bed for the new seeds. And when you do that, it's hard to do that without tilling, and when you till, you disturb the soil. Now, for vegetable crops, you still need to do that, right? But at my farm, we do vegetable crops and other things that do require a surface disturbance, but I have other techniques for doing it that don't disturb the soil. Things like solarization, power harrowing, and things that are a little beyond today. And, but I also grow a lot of perennial crops, like gooseberries and aronia berries and haskcaps and strawberries and asparagus and things like that come back every year without having to replant. But I actually rarely disturb the soil at this point.
So Adrian's going to be spending the day with us. So we have students at lunch and leaders of films that means a